the reality is you had good leaders who engaged and inspired, and you had bad leaders who, read you the SOG or SOP and told you, the task that needed to be done. And I can unequivocally state that the people that led Walt Disney World longer are the ones who had the relational side of it, the relational dynamic of it.
Welcome to the Attraction Pros podcast, where we discuss the latest trends and challenges facing the attractions industry today.
We chat with some of the top leaders in the field and provide resources that will help develop your career in this great industry.
I am Josh Liebman. I am obsessed with the guest experience and helping attractions make that their top priority for success.
And I'm Matt Heller. I am passionate about organizational effectiveness, leadership development, and employee engagement.
Now sit upright, hold on tight, and get ready for the Attraction Pros podcast.
Hey, Josh, how are you?
Hey, Matt, I'm doing great. How are you?
Well, if I might share, I am fantastic.
A lot of build up there.
A lot of build up. Hey, I have a question for you.
Okay.
What is something that you like to do completely outside of what you do for work?
What is something I like to do that is completely outside what I do for work? I'm going to give you the soft, cheesy answer, and it's spend time with my son, Jacob.
That is not a cheesy answer at all. Although it could relate to cheese on a stick, but we won't go there.
Which he hasn't had yet. He needs to have one soon. He might be a little young for it, but yeah.
Right. So here's the second part of the question. That's something you like to do completely outside of what you do for work. But are there lessons or things that you can take away from your experiences with Jacob that you can actually apply to work?
It is funny you say that, because I was thinking of the flip side of this question in our interview today, of thinking all of this amazing leadership leadership advice and life lessons that I thought, oh, I could apply that directly to parenting as well. So, but to answer your question, yes, I think they go back and forth in terms of building relationships with other people, those who you might have influence over, in the interest of, well, in some ways, it's in the interest of sustaining the business and having the business goals achieved, or in the case of my example, in the goals of the family, the goals of everything we're doing at home. So yeah, I think that they can go back and forth pretty easily.
All right. So you're able to connect some dots between the relationship that obviously you're building with your son every day, and what you're able to do in the work that you do. And the reason I bring this up is because our guest today, Jim MacPhee, he connects a lot of dots, right? He talks a lot about things that may not seem like they're related to the theme park world, but he relates them to life. He relates them to navigating life, and the way that he connects the dots between all those different experiences and then extrapolates a lesson from it, I found really, really fascinating.
So Jim MacPhee retired in 2021, but prior to that, he was the chief operating officer and senior vice president of a little place called Walt Disney World. And he was with Walt Disney World for 43 years. So started out as driving boats on Bay Lake when he was in his early 20s, stayed with the company, moved up, was part of so many unbelievable projects. Maybe not unbelievable because we believe them. We know that they happen, but magnificent projects within the company, within the organization, that we get to hear unbelievable stories and fantastic lessons along the way. He was part of the team that put together the Next Generation project, which introduced MyMagic Plus and the Magic Bands, and the way that people now know today of buying tickets and going into the parks that also is their hotel room key and their credit card, and integrating that entire guest experience. Matt, my brain was on fire during this interview. I took so many notes. I so much of his history and his background was really exciting from a business side, and then just so much of what he said from a leadership and relationship guidance part of it just resonated so much, and I think it just really hit home.
It really resonated with me as well. And I have to say that so many of the things that he brought up as his philosophies, his beliefs, his practices really do align with a lot of things that you and I talk about. So I think it's great validation for some of the things that you and I talk about, because here's someone who has, many more years of experience in a large corporation. Like you said, he's done so many different things, and he's found that some of the things that we talk about and we feel are important were also important from his learnings and his experience. One of the things he talks about really a lot is building relationships. And, he kind of relates it to pushing a wet noodle, in that when you're trying to get something done and you don't have the relationship built up, you're kind of working against yourself, which is kind of that metaphor of pushing a wet noodle. So it's really interesting to hear him talk about how you got to build a relationship first, even before you think you need it. Then that relationship will come to fruition when the rubber hits the road.
Mm-hmm. And with all of that, after his 43 years at Disney and retiring in 2021, he was recognized with his name on a window on Main Street, USA, which, if you don't know, is just one of the biggest honors that you can get by being at Walt Disney World and being part of the Walt Disney Company.
Which is so cool. So next time I'm there, I'm going to look for it for sure. For sure.
Yes.
He also talked a lot about emotional and relationship intelligence or relational intelligence, and how that really can shape what a leader does and how a leader can be perceived. So I think it's time for us to stop talking. It's been 43 years since, we started talking about this. So let's get to this interview with Jim.
Let's navigate this great interview. Hi, Jim. Welcome to the Attraction Pros podcast. We are so excited to have the opportunity to talk with you today. How are you?
I'm doing great, and I'm equally, if not more, excited to be here. I've heard a lot about what you all are doing, not just for the industry at large, but for the individuals within the industry, and it's an exciting opportunity to join you. Thanks for the time today.
Well, thank you. Excellent. We appreciate that. Well, I feel like we've got a lot of ground to cover here in this interview, but to kick this off, can you just give us a brief overview? Tell us a little bit about your career background.
Sure, I'll do some skimming along the way, and we can go deeper wherever you would like. So hard to believe I joined the company, a long time ago, about 45, 46 years ago. I grew up in the Ormond Beach area. I went to high school over there and worked a lot of summer jobs in a variety of different areas under the hospitality banner. I chose Florida State as my destination for post-high school education. Had a great couple of years there, but to be honest, I, hadn't really found my way quite yet as to what I was going to do. And so I asked my mom and dad. I never tell my mom and dad anything, but I asked my mom and dad, hey, I might want to take a break. And my dad said, yeah, you can take a break, but you're going to have to go to work. Why don't you check out that place called Disney? So I drove over from Ormond Beach, which is about an hour and 20 minutes from Orlando, from the Disney part of Orlando. Walked into the casting trailer. At that time there was one theme park, a couple hotels, and a campground. And I got signed up for a summer job, and it was the perfect summer job. I was driving boats on Bay Lake in the Seven Seas Lagoon. So obviously that began the start of a 43-year career, but it was nirvana for me because I grew up on the water, surfing and skiing and diving and on sailing and all of that stuff. So to think I was getting paid a whopping $3.10 an hour to drive boats for a living was pretty darn cool. Little did I know at the time that I was entering this era of growth for Disney, whether it was the soon to come Epcot just a few years after I joined, or studios, 7 or 8 years right behind that. And then, of course, Disney's Animal Kingdom in 1998. I spent a couple years in California with the opening of Disney's California Adventure. But, it was a wonderful career. I can honestly say I, worked from the bottom to about higher than I thought, yet as high as I wanted to. And I had a chance to work in mostly the theme parks side of the business. I worked in all the parks here at Walt Disney World. The California reference I made earlier And, within that became a period of growth for me as well. I was very fortunate to work for a variety of incredible leaders who were inspirational for me and sort of mentoring me along the way. And, it was kind of a rapid cycle. Boom, Epcot opens. Boom, Studios opens. Boom, Animal Kingdom opens. It was a lot in a 43-year period for me. Probably one of the biggest, areas of learning and experience growth for me was in the MyMagic Plus inception with what we called internally the next generation experience. I was running Epcot at the time, was vice president of Epcot, and Meg Crofton, the president of Walt Disney World at the time, asked me if I would consider going on this special assignment, which is always a little fear invoking when they talk about special assignments. But I said, sure, as long as I can keep one foot on Epcot and take on this assignment, I'd be good. I'm not sure I did a good service to my team, but for the next year, I managed to do about 75% of the next generation experience. And that was really cool. I mean, that was a stretch for me. I saw different levels of the organization beyond parks and resorts. I saw, the ability to bring in and infuse, consumer trends, whether it's personalization, customization, simplification, blah, blah, blah. And so we launched that. It was bumpy launch, as any technology project is, but that kind of became the gateway. I think I was put in the position of senior vice president for the parks for a few years, from 2011 or 12 to about 2016, 17. And then I was appointed the chief operating officer for Walt Disney World. So I had all of the parks, resorts, and the people who are obviously doing all the hard work reporting to me for probably my last 5-year run. I led the closure for COVID with the governor and the advisory board here in Central Florida, and then of course the reopening. And so at the end of the reopening, I kind of said, "Wow, I don't know what else there is to do. Feels like everything here might be getting back on the hamster wheel and running away at it." So I decided, with my kids, Anna and Valentine, graduating high school, I decided to retire in April of 2001, shared it with my leader, Jeff Foley, about a year earlier, and we announced it in December. So haven't looked back, certainly miss the people. I don't miss a lot of the work, but I'm enjoying this life after in a pretty extraordinary way.
That's incredible. I just, think about your career and for how many people you've had you've had so many people's dream jobs, running parks and, being part of that next gen experience. But I want to go back to your dream job of driving that boat on Bay Lake. And I'm curious, throughout your entire career, you probably have lessons that you took from that very first job that you brought with you throughout your entire career. What were some of those lessons or some of those things that, you learned during that time that you're able to take with you throughout your career?
Well, watercraft, I was in the watercraft department and I was driving. I don't know if you can, it's probably blurry, but there's a picture right there of my first boat, the Voyager, that I ever drove, a 36-foot launch. And again, having grown up on the water, it was like, wow, this is really cool. I do believe, maybe for another podcast, there are extraordinary lessons in sailing in particular, but in boating, sailing in particular, and leadership, because it's, very many contrarian points of view on fastest path of travel, the dynamic that everything has to work together to create forward momentum, all of those things. But watercraft was really cool because, again, there was only one park and a couple hotels and a campground. And so watercraft, part of transportation, gave me a pretty big and broad overview of the entire property, as opposed to running a ride or working in a food and beverage location or merchandise or whatever. And so I had several experiences in transportation. It's a hard job. Well, watercraft wasn't that hard, although it is the coldest place at Walt Disney World on a cold winter day. If you're on a launch, going against that wind. But it taught me a lot about navigation of life, as much of a pun as that is. And what I loved about watercraft, for me, it was the most important thing for me to experience initially coming into Disney, was a community. And most of these folks were, school teachers working a summer weekend job, or they're in high school working a summer weekend job. I mean, certainly there were plenty of full-time people, but this was a fraternity of sorts of some really cool people, made me feel very welcome into the organization. And there's watercraft reunions that still happen here with some of the cronies that I worked with. But I think so. Watercraft gave a great sense of community. It gave a great sense of an overview of what this property is on scale, and it's real world stuff. I mean, when whether you're driving trams or monorails or boats, you have people's lives in your hands, and I enjoyed it. To be honest, you're kind of out there on your own, so you're not, always having somebody looking over your shoulder. You have a little bit of freedom to be able to navigate that. But I think my lesson learned mostly was the sense of community and the connecting of the dots, which obviously many modes of transportation do on the scale of Walt Disney World at that time. And now, of course, you fast forward now, it's like 5x, in terms of size and scope. But yeah, that was a pretty great start to a really great career.
So, Jim, I'm curious as well, kind of unpacking your career journey and the stories that you just told us. Your time working on the Next Gen and Magic Plus project. You said that it was a bumpy project, as any tech project is, and I'm thinking of parallels to being a boat captain. You said navigating life, navigating the bumps on the water. So maybe this is a segue, a tacky transition, perhaps, but navigating those bumps of this a groundbreaking tech project. I remember during the time when that was going on, it seemed like the whole world was looking at it and saying, this is going to be transformative. This is going to be an absolute game changer. And 100% it was. And like you said, there were some bumps with it too. So can you talk a little bit about what it was like being really inside that project?
Yeah, first of all, a couple things. I mean, a ton of learnings, much of which I wrote about, which we can talk about later. But you know, I have this, in hindsight, and remember, I have the benefit of 65 years on this planet, and hindsight, to be able to look back and cherry pick some of the real tangible learnings that I had along the way. So I didn't have this wisdom when I was your age, or, when I was 21 years old, starting to drive boats. The next generation experience, I've always been a consumer centric and cast member centric leader. I believe, obviously, the P&L is important for the business, but I believe all of our decisions at Disney, when done well, are made through the lens of cast impacts, guest impacts, and business impacts. And we could sit here all over the rest of the call and try and name off projects or programs that were implemented that hit on all those cylinders, cast, guest, business, or didn't, And so I've always had the lens of this experience that, we had as being incredibly magical. But at the same time, as Walt said, times and conditions change so rapidly, you got to stay focused on the future. And we were sensing an erosion in our guest satisfaction scores. And it was becoming pretty apparent that although we'd spent a lot of time in previous years trying to really address that, it was an uphill battle. And as we unpacked it all, many departments had tried and not succeeded. And I'm not a big believer of the department's solo responsibility to take an initiative or a program or a transformation like this and take it to the next level. It's got to be a team effort. And I'm also a big believer that I already got a full-time job. If you ask me to take on something like that and do my full-time job, I'm going to do both poorly, or poorer than if I had the responsibility. So I have to give Meg Crofton, who was the president of Walt Disney World at the time, first female president, and the leadership team a lot of props, because they recognized that we had a pretty significant, erosion in our guest satisfaction. We also had become, in a variety of ways, very complex and very transactional. And we really had woven in any personalization, customization, or even simplification I got all the shun words in there, but into the mix. And so we were losing ground on a magical experience because consumer expectations were changing pretty dramatically. And with credit to Jay Rizzullo, Meg Crofton, and the leadership team at the very highest levels of the DPEP organization, Disney Parks, Experiences, and Products, they recognized the problem, but they knew that if they approached it the same old way, which is give it to Mikey, he'll fix it, it wouldn't go anywhere. And so, to their credit, they formed a group of 5 individuals. I was one of the 5 representing operations, but we had a business development person, we had a technology person, we had 2 Imagineers, and the 5 of us were given a charter statement. And the charter statement was 1-2 pages max. And the highlight of it was go out into the fabric of the experience and try and find, trying to eradicate barriers, friction points, lines, and hassles throughout the consumer experience. And eradicate them, or if you can't, then figure out how to simplify them along the way. Now, that sounds very simple in terms of the wording, but it's massive in terms of the scale of Walt Disney World. And of course, we had latent 20-year-old technology platforms to have to think about building off of, et cetera, et cetera. So the five of us left our day jobs. We were kind of a self-led group. None of us really knew each other very well before, but we literally traveled. The California guys came here, the Florida people went there, back and forth every week. And we had 8 weeks to go back to the board and present what we would call the next generation experience. And it began with a very simple look in the mirror for ourselves, which was fascinating. We called it the paradigm shift. Who are we today, and who do we want to be tomorrow? Today, we're complex and transactional. Tomorrow, we want to be simple and seamless. Today, we're mass anonymous. We don't really know anybody. You could have come to the Grand Floridian for the 30th time and paying those kind of rates. We better know you after 10 times or 5 times, but we didn't know them after 30 times. We wanted to be more simple, more personalized. We want to let the guests navigate the experience. So customize, move from from that complex and transactional place to simple and seamless. And so anyway, it's a wonderful board, and I use it all the time, even now, almost 10, 15 years later, because it was a humbling and vulnerable experience to be able to say, you're not that great at these pieces and parts. You can be, but it's going to take time, it's going to take attention, it's going to take money. So we pitched to the board. And I'll be honest with you, most of our challenge were more internal than external. There were some people who didn't think we should be spending $1 billion on software. You could buy a lot of rides, not that many anymore, but you could buy a lot of rides for $1 billion. But we needed to improve the base experience, and I'm really happy with what we did. It was bumpy because technology is just bumpy. Latent 20-year-old systems, as I mentioned earlier, trying to get consumers to adopt to a different type of behavior. But in the end, when we got through the trough of challenges 6 months into it, we kind of broke out, and it was one of the highest guest satisfaction steps we'd ever taken. It drove a longer length of stay, which was really kind of the backbone of the financial proposition. And our guests told us, that it made their experience better. They didn't have to carry around 15 different pieces of collateral between guide maps, theme park tickets, room keys, fast passes. Everything was on a single form factor called the Magic Band. And it was really cool. Companies changed a lot. Practices have changed a lot since then, with the, post-COVID opening without Fast Pass and now into Genie. I'm not going to really go into that. I really enjoyed the Fast Pass dynamic. I really think it was a differentiator for Disney. And, at the same time, there's a lot of challenges in the world today, including the business side of it. So they've done, what they've done for what I think are the right reasons, but it was a bit of a step back to everything I just said for the last 10 minutes. But I don't want to go there. The point is, the company made a decision to be aggressive in this space and improve the experience. They dedicated a team to go do that instead of adding on to other people's day jobs. And by the way, we engaged the broader organization 2 years out, which is kind of unheard of because you've got confidentiality and all these things. But we wanted them to move from this, I've heard about this thing called MyMagic Plus, to I own it. And if they own it, then, it's gold from there.
Jim, one of the things you mentioned in there that I thought was fascinating is how you said some of those challenges were more internal than external. And some people said, hey, we can buy a lot of rides for that amount of money instead of buying software. And so I'm curious if we can dive a little deeper into what did it take to get some of those people on board, or, what was that process like to ensure that everybody was on the same page as you were moving forward?
Yeah. Great question. And I want to underscore this. It wouldn't have happened if there was, a lot of turmoil internally. It just frankly wouldn't have happened. I do think it's why it hadn't happened, at that time. But to answer your question, I think top box sponsorship is key. When the chairman of Parks and Resorts, it was Disney Parks and Resorts at the time, says, we're going to do this, and it's sponsored at the highest level of the organization. And they demonstrate a very sincere interest in it, strong support of it, then guess what? Everybody's going to get in line, a lot faster than if it was Joe or Jane over in the XYZ department trying to push a wet noodle. I did a lot of horizontal work in my life, and I always referred to it as pushing a wet noodle because, nobody has to really do anything, but they have to understand why they need to do things. I'm a big fan of Simon Sinek's Golden Circle, the how, the what, and the why. But, we had to build consensus, and we had to lead with clarity, unity, and agility. And I heard those 3 words, or I read those 3 words in this book called Strategic Speed. And a buddy of mine, Scott Reynolds, I'll always remember him because, when I talk about clarity, it means where's the organization going? What's the destination that we're headed? And, who's coming along on the ride? And this is what we're going to do along the way. Now, I'm very clear to very quickly follow behind that is you cannot develop perfection as you march toward transformation. You have to be, I always say, define your destination and go, and be nimble and agile along the way. And as long as your beacon is always out there in front of you, you might not be able to walk the path that you thought you were going to walk. But as long as you're maintaining forward momentum and working toward improving whatever you're trying to experience, it's great. But clarity was key, established clearly by the top box of the organization broadly, and sponsorship and protection. Because, many of us weren't on what I would call the Walt Disney World Steering Committee. We weren't sitting there every week. We were kind of the next rung down, still relatively senior in the organization, but the next rung down. And so people's cheese was being moved, people who had departments that did things like collect data on this or measure that probably weren't going to have to do that as much. And I think human nature and personality starts to get protective when, when their turf is threatened. It's just part of a natural evolution of change. I love I love talking about 2 things, experience and transformation. Experience is not what people do, but how they feel while they're doing that. Now, I know that sounds really obvious, but I could say, hey, I went to Disney, I did 8 rides. Wow, that's really cool. You did 8 rides. But if I did teacups or Dumbo, the entire 8 rides, that's not going to be that great. I mean, I'm not going to feel that great. But if I had great experiences with the cast members that were there, which is always our goal, and I had a great experience, in the air development, I had a great experience on the ride. That's how I felt. I felt good. And then transformation. I love the definition of transformation. It's a process of profound and radical change that reorients a company, its culture, its people, and its processes to an entirely different level of effectiveness. It's not a project, or it's not a flavor of the month or a program. It is a 180. And it really, what it did internally was broke down a lot of walls. It really forced connectivity across the entire horizontal view of the site. And so that is gold in terms of outcomes that may have not necessarily been intended, but you really separated the strong from the weak. I hate to say it in such a granular way, but there are people who recognize the ability to do this and what it would bring to bear. And some people also looked at it as like more work, and they don't want to do more work. So when you're dealing with 75,000 people at Walt Disney World alone, that's a lot of personalities to manage, across a lot of different levels. So I'm not sure if I answered your question directly, but it was about clarity, driving for unity, everybody to believe in it, or at least understand it if they didn't fully believe in it. And then, you'll move faster in an agility kind of way if you knock out those things. I forgot my analogy. Liberty Bell. Think about the Liberty Bell. At the very top is a little crack. And then when you come down into the bell, it's a fissure, it's a gaping opening. Apply that to organizations for clarity and lack of clarity. If everybody's clear by the top boxes of the organization on the direction we're headed, then it's probably not going to be as big a fissure because it's clear where we're going. And so I wanted to avoid that fissure at the bottom of the bell. And I roll by collaboration. I mean, I think relationships are humongous to me in my life, whether at work or at play. If you don't have great relationships between departments, between leaders of departments, then you got a really tough battle ahead. So I worked hard to build consensus and to be open to and vulnerable by the feedback that we received of it along the way as well.
So you talk about relationships, and I know that's something that you're very passionate about. And the question that we'd love to ask you is, what matters more, leadership, or relationships?
That's a really, 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 really deep question. Let me tell you how I think about leadership. I think there's two dynamics at play with leadership, and it's going to sound simple, but it's not. The first dynamic is kind of the price of admission, and I would call that technical competencies. And technically, the definition of, I'm a big dictionary dude, by the way. I like to go in and just look at definitions of words because I don't know what it does. I used to drive my team crazy. But the definition of technical competence is the knowledge and ability required to apply specific technical principles and information to performing a job, function, or role. That's the price of admission. You got to know what you're doing if you're assigned to a job or a task or something like that. And you have to have the technical wherewithal. Underneath technical competency are two buckets that I talk about a lot, which is really mastery and command, and systems and critical thinking. Mastery and command is kind of the knowledge and skills that allow you to understand how to use something very well. So you have full mastery of whatever you're responsible for. And then you have the command that you have to earn to be able to march the team toward doing that. And then systems and critical thinking is really more using logic, applying an understanding of logic to determine truths, deceptions, and misunderstandings. Those are, lofty definitions, but I don't really ever talk about that stuff, to be honest with you, because that stuff, you got to do it. I mean, you have to know what you are responsible for in your daily tasks. You should know how it relates to the broader consumer experience of your goods, but you have to do that. I think where leaders differentiate them is a much more deeper subject, and I would call it emotional and relational intelligence. And the idea of emotions is really the ability to perceive, understand, and manage and handle other people's points of view, other people's opinions, other people's emotions, along the way. Relational is more our ability as humans to connect and establish trust with one another. I personally believe in life, relationships are the most important thing that we could be focusing on. I will go to my grave saying that. It's been my fuel. It's how I roll. It's how I hope that I'm raising my children with. It's how I hope I'm, engaging in the community with. It's about getting to know people at a granular level when you don't need them to go climb a mountain, or you don't need them to go put a fire out, but to invest in them on a personal level. And then, this is a shameless plug for my book, but I mentioned mastering command systems and critical thinking over here on the technical side. Over here on the relationship side, and I think you said it, Matt, it's about engaging, inspiring, and leading. Whether you are being engaged or engaging, whether you are being inspired or inspiring, or it's about whether you're leading or being led. I think that people who will go to the end of the earth for leaders do so because of the return on the investment they feel they want to give for what's been invested in them. I mean, I used to always say to a leader at Disney in operations, I need you, yes, to run your business, the technical side of it, but I need you to go into the softest side of your heart and engage, inspire, and lead these people that work for you, who are probably living paycheck to paycheck, and they're here because they believe in our company. You need to keep that pilot light lit, and you need to start a fire with it, because if we expect them to engage our guests, we as leaders better engage our cast members to demonstrate the values to them of the benefit of doing so. So, once again, I got to rambling there, but I think that I do believe relationships are the most important things in life. And I think in a leadership role, leadership's hugely important. My father led me, my mother led me, my wife leads me, my family leads me, and it's important too. But that leadership wouldn't exist if it wasn't for the relationships, that we have, amongst ourselves. Now, there are different industries that require different levels of relationship or engaging, inspiring, and leading. There's no question. If you're working in a laboratory trying to cure cancer, probably not going to be engaging and inspiring and leading too much, but you are saving the world. But if you're out in the theme park business, which is the industry you all represent so well, you better be doing that, and you better be doing that a lot more, because it's not about anybody's degree, whether it's a master's, 4-year master's, PhD, or high school. It doesn't matter. that to me is technical competency that gets you in the door. What differentiates a person is their ability to relate to multiple people on multiple levels with a variety of different, authentically, by the way, really authentically, with humility and vulnerability in mind, to be able to, establish themselves. And I never really wanted to meet somebody for the first time when I was ringing the fire bell saying, we got to go deal with this thing. I invested in people so that when I rang that bell, I didn't have to worry about the relationship side. It was all, let's get to action, because the time off the fire was the time to inspire. Hey, see what I did there? Anyway, I'm really passionate about it, in case you can't tell.
Yeah.
That relationships are huge.
Well, and this question may lead to another plug for your book, which is totally fine because I'm super excited to read it myself. But what comes to mind for me is all those things you're talking about are things that, may come somewhat naturally to some people, but may not come naturally to others. So the question, are leaders born or made? And where does the responsibility lie, to get that technical competence, to understand how to be vulnerable? Is that come from their experience? Does that come from, a mentor? Is it a combination of all those things? So maybe the question is just about developing leaders into that kind of ideal situation that you're talking about, because not everybody probably has all of those skills coming into it, certainly at various levels within an organization.
Yeah. You kind of answered the question with your three or four examples along the way there, but I don't think it's any one thing. I think it's a kind of a potpourri of it all that kind of tie into that. What I wanted to do when I retired was to maybe consult a little bit, which I did. It was okay. I did it for a year, and it just kind of was a nice wean off of, working full time. I did it part time, but what I've been doing still and love to do is mentor. And my goal in life is to find someone half my age and be able to impart wisdom that I've learned along the way into their heads now. Whether they action on it now, it's an earworm for them, to be able to tap back into. And in fact, I have a few folks that I'm doing that with, and people did it for me. The word mentor didn't exist when I was growing up, but the reality is you had good leaders who engaged and inspired, and you had bad leaders who, read you the SOG or SOP and told you, the task that needed to be done. And I can unequivocally state that the people that led Walt Disney World longer are the ones who had the relational side of it, the relational dynamic of it. Now, everybody can engage. Not everybody can inspire, and not everybody can lead. So there's a culling out that happens with people that goes deep, in my opinion, deep into their innate DNA as to what is leadership all about, and some people just don't have it, and a lot more do, but some people don't. And I don't believe in people trying to do something that they can't do, or don't have the capability of doing. I almost said have never done. I do believe in doing that, but I don't believe that, I don't believe everybody automatically gets a lead card when they step from, point A to point B to point C to point D. None of that makes you a leader. Might make you a manager. You've heard the adage of comparisons, managers and leaders. There's a million examples of that. But to lead is, I actually had this. To lead, the definition of lead is to hold one by the hand and move them forward down a path. I know that sounds so silly. Nobody holds anybody by the hand. It's an HR flag on the play these days. But to hold them by the hand is a sign of, deep personal engagement, to be able to get them to come along the way. Now, I think I did it well throughout all of my career. I didn't do it great in my early stages of my career, because I also believe there's a reason why they call work work, and there's a reason why they call jobs jobs. It's a task, but it's a third of my life. If I sleep 1/3 of my life, play 1/3 of my life, and work 1/3 of my life, why wouldn't I want to have fun in the work job bucket 1/3 of my life? And so I always went in and had responsible fun in an environment to create an aura or an environment that people wanted to be a part of, whether they were doing a task or not. They were part of that culture and part of that fabric.
Jim, this has been such a fascinating conversation, and we still have a few minutes left here, but I just want to stress just how much this is resonating with me, and how much I appreciate everything. Even Matt, the question that you asked, I'm so glad you asked it. I was thinking the exact same thing as far as back to that question of are leaders made or born, and being able to kind of get to that level of engaging and inspiring and leading. And I was even thinking back to just my early leadership days, and not that I didn't have mentors, not that I didn't have people supporting me, because I did, but everything that you've shared, I don't think I had that mindset. And I think that reflected very much in my early leadership, because I think I was more excited about being a manager and overseeing an operation than I was perhaps about truly engaging and inspiring, those who I was leading. So
yeah, well, good. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And I, and as I said earlier, I wish I had the manual on all this, when I started driving boats and I could read up on it, but I didn't read a lot of books, when I was growing up. There is one book that I do enjoy very, very much, and I reference quite often. It's Jim Collins' Good to Great book. And if you ask me, which may be one of your next questions, is like, name a couple traits or, values that a great leader has, I firmly believe it's about vulnerability and humility. And, vulnerability is the ability to keep your mind open to others' points of view, to recognize what you're really great at and what you're not, and surround yourself in the category of what you're not great at. Surround yourself with people who are great at that, because you don't have to master everything. But this notion of humility and vulnerability is huge, huge, huge to me. But anyway, Jim Collins' book, Good to Great, talks about humility. It's in my book. I had a situation a couple of decades ago where I worked for two different leaders. Meg Crofton, I'm not going to name them. President of Walt Disney World, just name one. President of Walt Disney World, and another person. Meg is the poster child for engage, inspire, lead. She is humble, vulnerable, yet very driven, blah, blah, blah. This other individual was the opposite of Meg, somewhat self-centered, very much focused on their self-personal growth, kind of played the game of team nods and or team engagement, but it was transactional. It was like, yeah, that felt like grease, get it off my hands. But both of them were very senior leaders in the organization. And it broke me down a little bit, because I had to go study what is the disconnect that I'm having with this individual. And I realized they weren't humble. They had no humility. And I actually studied the Bible. I studied, the dictionary definition. I did a variety of things. And I think, and humility, Jim Collins calls humility the top characteristic of the top 2% of C-suite leaders that run these big businesses. And, humble doesn't mean like easy to beat on or pick on or whatever. It's humble is appreciating the values of those around you more than your own. And anyway, I can go off on a big tangent here, but yeah, I mean, I think I wish I would have known this a long time ago.
Well, yeah, and that was one of the questions that we were going to ask about, kind of advice for, leaders that are up and coming in the theme park industry or in the attractions industry in general. And certainly being vulnerable, being humble are certainly two of those traits. What else would you put in that category? If you have someone that you're mentoring and saying, these are the things you need to work on, what are those things that you would advise?
Well, patience is the first one, because a lot of, my children, and using them as an example, they want to know what's next. They want to be in position with whatever the future may hold. And I have a firm belief that if you look too far forward, you're going to miss exactly the ground you're stepping on right now and the beauty that's around you at any given time. And I also have a mindset that says, what's the hurry? What I tell everybody is, everything that we do in life, but in particular in the workplace, whether it's the first day of your first job, is a brick. And this brick is a set of bricks, one of a set of bricks that builds this foundation for who you will be 10 years, 20 years, 30 years from now. And I was blessed at Disney to, worked in almost every single, I wouldn't say every single job you can, but many different departments, foods, merchandise, convention sales, transportation, theme parks, blah, blah, entertainment, a lot of every line of business I had experience in. Well, guess what? When I get to be in charge of the parks, or I get to be in charge of a park, or if I get to be the COO of Walt Disney World as I ended my career, I have this massive foundation that has fueled me with real-time intelligence on what it takes to get jobs done. So it would be very, very hard for people to pull the wool over my eyes about something that could or could not be done. If I had not had those experiences, I guarantee you I wouldn't be as effective as a leader as I was when I climbed higher into the organization, because it gave me, I love these 4 words, and I never could figure out, there's 4 words. I never could figure out the acronym spelling correctly. But I believe that I used to run an organization. It was newly formed. I'm not going to go into it, but newly formed organization. There was a bunch of reorgs going on. It happened to be a place where not the best talent landed in. And I came back from California, and I kind of sat in that as a director. I sat as an entry-level executive in that organization. We're like, man, this is a little messed up, because people don't come to us for help or come to us for support, nor are we out there. This is one of those horizontal jobs I'm talking about, nor are we out there giving that. And I realized, because eventually I got promoted to lead that job about a year after I got back from California, to lead that organization. And I did a little bit of a self-assessment. I said, man, we're missing some things here. And the 4 words that kept coming to me was relationships, influence, knowledge, and credibility. I called it RIC, spelled wrong. You got to kind of start with relationships, but the other one can go where they want to go. But relationships, influence, knowledge, and credibility. You got to build relationships when you're walking in the hallway. I mentioned in my book, I remember taking over Epcot. It was back in the BlackBerry days, right? And it was novel, right? Now we have a device and we can read our email. So I'm going from my VP office through the main corridor that every single cast member cruises down at Epcot to go get on the bus to go to the backstage areas of World Showcase or Future World. And I'm cruising to the bathroom with my head in my device. And I did it too many times, but I did finally realize, what am I doing here? What kind of they might not know who I am. Maybe they do. I don't care. But I'm showing them that this device is more important than them, when I should be putting that thing as far away as possible and saying, hello, how's your day? What's happening? And what's going on? And I think we have every moment to engage, and that would be the relationship side of it. The influence side, because how do you become a good influencer? By having a good relationship with somebody. Might not be your best buddy, but you've built a level of credibility. There's the other word, in the RIC model, that you built credibility, that you probably know what you're talking about, and they're going to listen to you, and you're going to listen to them. And then, of course, knowledge. So relationship, influence, knowledge, and credibility, in whatever order you want, are extremely important. And I would say, think about that. I used to wake up every day and say, who haven't I talked to in the last 6 weeks that I really need to talk to, just in case. Hopefully I enjoy talking to them, but just in case I need them down the road. And I had a list of people it was a relationship management list. It sounds silly. Nobody ever saw it, never pulled it out, never talked about it. But I knew I had to stay in touch with my FOS colleague. I knew I had to stay in touch with my finance colleague, my HR colleague. I knew that I needed to stay connected, and my peers who, were running the other parts of the business, because we're our team, and the ability to be a team is through the relationship side of it.
So we are really starting to run low on time, and I feel like we could keep talking for hours if we wanted to. But I do have another question for you, though. And when I was in college, I worked in attractions at the Magic Kingdom, and I remember going through traditions, day one orientation, and then Once Upon a Time is Now, the Magic Kingdom specific orientation. And I remember the facilitator, when we got to the entrance of the Magic Kingdom and we're walking down Main Street, she pointed out the windows. And she said, in particular, take note of the names who are on the windows, because just like when you watch a movie, you see the credits at the end of it that show all the important people that came together to make this happen. That's what we see here on the windows. What's it like having your name on a window on Main Street?
Oh, it's pretty awesome. I mean, it's hard to even fathom how incredible that is. That's a little blurred out, but my window's over here. And our window happens to be next to Meg Crofton's, who I mentioned earlier, is one of my faves. But I don't know, is it backwards to you guys? Talent, education, and training. And It's a shared window with Phil, Trevor, myself, and Dwan, who I know has been on your talks before. I didn't see it coming. I honestly didn't think we were going to get a window. I didn't find out I was getting a window until um, my retirement Zoom, because it was COVID, till my retirement Zoom party. And it was like I was floored because I honestly hadn't thought about it. I don't really, I'm going to say this, and I'm going to contradict myself in a minute. I don't really care about material things like that. But when you get it, it's really, really, really an honor, and it's really, really cool. In fact, I didn't think I was getting one, and I figured somebody would ask me about it, while I was heading toward retirement. You're going to get a window? And people did ask me about it. So I don't know. And I said, it's a tangible thing on a window on Main Street that I don't know that 0.000000001% of the guests actually see and pay attention to. But I did say to them, my window is really in my heart, and my window is always open for you. And I actually had a line. That's pretty sad. I had a line to say, if I didn't get a window, I still got a window for you, man. But it's touching. I spent 43 years, 2/3 of my life at this company, and did a lot of extraordinary things. I worked really hard, didn't do everything perfect. We made mistakes all the time, but we embraced learning from those mistakes. I think you guys were talking about fail fast earlier. I do believe you should fail fast, responsibly. Responsibly fail, meaning you've done your homework best you can, and then if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. I don't think it's ready, fire, aim. But I do think there's a lot of prep. And if you fail, you fail. And guess what? You don't do that again, or new leader will come in 20 years from now and say, hey, I got a great idea. And you'll have to sit there and go, oh yeah, we tried that. But, I don't know. I mean, I'm touched by the window, extremely touched by it. It's the most prestigious honor anybody in the business I grew up in could have. And I'm, use my own words, I'm humbled by that. And I'm grateful for it. I do get notes every once in a while. Hey, I just saw your window. I was like, great, somebody saw it. But it's an honor, obviously, the highest honor I could even think of ever receiving for my service. So yeah, it's pretty cool.
Well, and it certainly sounds like it's well deserved based on your experience and your contributions to Disney. So, Jim, thank you so much for your time today. This has really been a fascinating conversation. If people want to find out more about you or learn about getting your book, where would you send them?
Well, first of all, I'm not. My book is actually located on Amazon. It's called Engage, Inspire, and Lead. And I think the team here will put a link, hopefully, on the bottom of the distribution of it, and you can grab that. It's about 2/3 of my career, kind of lessons learned. The book is called Engage, Inspire, Lead, Riding the Waves of Life and Leadership from my 43-year career at the Walt Disney Company. It is about life. There's not a castle on the cover of this. I don't believe in any of that. I believe in this. I believe in water. I believe in nature. I believe in energy. I'm not trying to get sappy here, but I want to write about myself, of which Disney was 2/3 of my life on it. I do have toward the end a section that I break down my principles and beliefs, all of which, probably no surprise, nicely fit under Engage, Inspire, and Lead. And I talk about many of these things all the time. As I said, I wasn't planning on writing a book when I retired. Several people said I should. I said, no, I'm not that. I don't do that. But I'm glad I did. It was very cathartic. It was a wonderful bridge from the incredible career that I had to now this incredible next chapter of my life. And so I'm really, really glad that I did it. But it taught me more about life than it did about, well, I wrote it, so it didn't teach me much, but it taught me more about life and my life as much as, or more than leadership, because I think people who think that they got to go read leadership books or work on their leadership often might be missing a step. I believe firmly that everybody needs to work on their relationships and their ability to engage and inspire, and then ultimately lead. Because when you have engaged and you have inspired, you've got the credibility now to go lead. So, I've said that ad nauseum up to this point.
Excellent. Well, we appreciate it, and we will absolutely put that in the show notes to make sure that anyone who's listening is able to get this. Jim, once again, thank you so much. This was just such an amazing conversation. We really appreciate your time today. I learned so much. This is just so great. And for everyone out there who is watching and listening, just remember, we are all attraction pros.
Thanks for listening to the Attraction Pros podcast.
Make sure to subscribe so you can tune in when new episodes release. And even better, please leave us a review on iTunes.
For more information, visit attractionpros.com.